Y buenos días a todos, bienvenidos de vuelta al show del CTO Summit 2020. Estamos en el día 3, espero que estéis todos medianamente despiertos. Yo creo que a mí, desde luego, me ha costado un poco levantarme hoy, pero tenemos un grandísimo invitado que se va a incorporar con nosotros para este último fragmento del CTO Summit. Ya sabéis que empezamos a las 10, vamos a tener 3 charlas en directo totalmente y vamos a ir recibiendo vuestras preguntas en el Brela, así que por favor, mientras nuestro siguiente invitado va dando su ponencia, podéis ir poniendo nuestras preguntas y para sorprender un poco, porque claro, es que es sábado y estamos así todos un poco todavía dormidos, quiero presentaros a otro invitado. Entonces, por favor, invitado nuevo, venga usted aquí. Entonces, hoy he decidido que no iba a presentar yo solo al siguiente invitado porque es un gran amigo, entonces me he traído ayuda porque necesitaba ayuda. Entonces, tú te sabes cómo va esto, ¿no? Yo digo lo que ha hecho él y tú dices su nombre, ¿ok? ¿Te vas a acordar, no? Vale. Pues tenemos a un gran amigo que llevamos mucho tiempo trabajando juntos, colaborando juntos. Ha tenido una amplia trayectoria en el mundo de la tecnología, como todos los que le conocéis. Empezó como software engineer en 11870. A continuación vino a formar parte de CTO, a formar parte del equipo de Tuenti como CTO, como director técnico. Todavía recuerdo aquella comida en aquel indio en donde estuvimos hablando del tema, luego os lo podrá contar. A su vez, de ahí saltó, después de un tiempo ahí, que yo le decía, Luis, haz otra cosa. No, que tengo que configurar, tengo que hacer una cosa, tengo que terminar esto que he empezado aquí en Tuenti, ¿no? Es persona que comienza con algo y hasta que no lo acaba no sale. Luego pasó a ser director de ingeniería en Schibsted Media Group y en la actualidad es Engineering Manager a Google Zurich, aunque me da a mí la impresión de que está intentando abrir Google Castellón. Así que, para presentar a nuestro siguiente invitado, tengo aquí a un copresentador, Eric, así que vamos a presentar a mi gran amigo, ¿cómo se llama? ¿No te acuerdas?
Luis Peralta.
¡Luis Peralta! ¡Bravo! Luis, un placer, muchas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros hoy.
Muchísimas gracias, Alex.
Bueno, perdona, se me ha olvidado comentar que tu charla va a ser en inglés. Que aunque es inglés, tú eres nativo de Castellón, así que podéis hacer las preguntas en inglés y en castellano, aunque Luis ahora a continuación va a hacer la charla en inglés, titulada Climbing the Ladder or Not. Luis, floor is yours.
Muchas gracias, Alex. Vamos a cambiar al inglés, aunque esto me va a costar un poco, pero vamos allá. So, welcome everyone. As Alex was saying, I hope that you're awake. It is not the case for me, unfortunately, so I'm drinking a coffee and I encourage you to do exactly the same. Hopefully, my talk is not going to be super tough, so you will not be needing a lot of your brain to be with me this morning. First, I would like to thank Geeks Hubs and the CTO Summit for having me. It's a great pleasure. I've known 𝗹𝗶𝗶𝗺𝗋 and company for quite some years already, and the master of presentations, Alex, for almost 20 years now. So yeah, time goes by. And before diving into the content of the deck, just a short disclaimer. The opinions that you're going to be hearing today, which are a few, are mine and are not those of my employer. So this said, let me go into presentation mode and I hope that everything works as expected. Yes, I think we're ready to go. Okay, so the talk today is about climbing the ladder or not. This is a very generic title. I would be talking about a bunch of very different things, but all related to the career that we would like to have, either because we're targeting becoming a CTO or maybe not. Or maybe we're targeting climbing the ladder in a corp or maybe not. This is basically what the talk is about. Before going into the content itself, let me introduce myself. I'm a geek wannabe. Back in the day, I used to say that I was a geek who moved into tech management and leadership, and this was making some people scared, particularly because when you're trying to hire a leader, if part of the description is that this folk is a geek, then I'm not trying to hire a geek, I'm trying to hire an executive. But the reality is that, unfortunately, over time, I am less of a geek and more of a people person, people manager, tech leader. And now my goal is to get close to technology again, because I don't get to spend that much time coding, unfortunately, these days. So I'm a geek wannabe. There is a fact about me that is not so known, which is that I was born in Galicia. So Alex was wrong. I was born in Galicia in a very small town, but it is true I grew up in Castellón, where I basically attended university, high school, etc., and so on. But after finishing and spending some time in Germany, I started my professional life in Madrid and spent there about 10 years. My dad says that I am a proper Galician in the sense that I can talk a lot without really saying much. So I hope this presentation is not going to be proving the case, but just beware. I've worked at different companies. So a few of them are highlighted here in the presentation, 11870.com or 𝗹𝗱𝗶𝗺𝗶𝗵.com, which is a business review site, pretty much like Yelp or back in the day 𝗹𝗱𝗶𝗺𝗶 or salir.com. I joined the company in the very early stage. I was like maybe the 4th employee there. I've also worked at Tuenti in the days of Tuenti being a social network, but also in the days of becoming a telco carrier. Then I spent some time working for Schibsted Adevinta, which is not a very well-known company, and I will touch on that later on. For Schibsted, I moved to Barcelona, spent there 3 years, and then I moved to Zurich to work for Google, what I am currently working on. On roles held, I've been a 𝗖𝗹𝗶𝗺𝗶𝗵, a software engineer. I've been a TL or a tech lead. I've been a TLM, tech lead and manager. I've been an engineering manager. I've been an engineering director, and I've been a CTO, which is quite a variety of roles. And depending on the place, each role meant something different. So that's something that I will be also covering during the deck. What does a specific role mean? I'm currently an engineering manager working on product analytics for Google Maps. And the easiest way to understand this is I lead the team that builds the Google Analytics for internal use for Google Maps. And that's a more or less recent picture of me, maybe 1 year ago, sometime like that, when we could still go to the office. How this presentation came to be. So this presentation came to be just like every great presentation, in front of some beers and a great discussion with a good friend of mine who was the CTO of 11870 and my manager. And we were having these beers around 2018 when we were both thinking what would be the right next professional step. And at that point, I had been interviewing with a bunch of very different companies, from startups to corps, in Spain, outside of Spain, different team sizes, different industries. And I was telling Jorge, well, I know of this company that is looking for this role, this other company that is looking for this role. And it was his answer that triggered a lot of thought on my side. And out of all the roles that I was telling him that I was aware were open, more or less in Spain, he said, but I want to be a CTO. And I thought, what does that mean? Because at that point, I had already been CTO, leading a large team at Tuenti. But then I decided to move on, right? And I had experienced some other things. And I really wanted to dig what is so important about being CTO. So I came up with a short list of what it might mean to be CTO. You lead, you make decisions, you collaborate, and you work across boundaries. And then the list is vague, and it doesn't cover a lot, basically because there are other things that a CTO might or might not do, but also that other roles without being CTO you might or might not be doing. So you would expect a CTO to get things done. The reality is that sometimes CTOs do not get things done. You would expect to be hiring for your team, but it all depends on the team size. And maybe if you have already set up your recruitment team, a CTO, you can be respected, but also believe me, a CTO can also be non-respected. You can be managing people, but if you hire a great VP of engineering, you might decide that is not something you want to do. So maybe you manage a lot of people, maybe not. You might be working with great people, but the reality is that there are a lot of very different companies. So great people, maybe yes, maybe no. You might be building great products, but maybe not, and so on and so on and so on. So the point I'm trying to bring to the table is, does it really mean anything to be CTO? And from a point of view, it does not. But this is, again, as I was mentioning before, just an opinion. And in my opinion, what really matters is the context. And I will be talking about some of the things that you can see in this slide as we move forward in the conversation. But I do find, for example, more important deciding if we want to work for a startup versus a corporation, or if the product that we're building is a B2B product or B2C. Are we working with a great team, a high-performing team, or just the average tech team? Does the company, the organization, the team have a strong culture or not? And is there a difference in working in a tech company versus a non-tech company? So I find some of these factors worth exploring and analyzing before deciding that we want to index on the role. Of course, the role question is important from my point of view, but it is by far not the only factor, and there are other things that we should consider. So one of them being the kind of product that we're building. Are we building a B2C product or are we building a B2B product? Because our job expectations are going to be different depending on this condition. So the size of the market or the potential customer base will be very different if we are in a B2C or a B2B business. And how our job or position is going to require different skills depends also because how do we get some insights on what needs to be developed is very different. On the B2C case, for example, we can rely on data if we have a large enough customer base. While in the B2B case, deciding what to build next is going to be coming either from a potential sales team or by a lot of direct client interactions. And for example, selling B2B is very different than selling B2C. In the B2B case, we need to build a very concrete business case, usually tailored to a specific client, where the return of investment needs to be very clear for the decision maker. And usually there is not just one decision maker. There are going to be several. And it may be even possible that you never meet with the decision maker, but rather that the people you're talking to are able to influence that decision maker. So how does this impact your potential role as a leader in a B2C or a B2B company? So from my point of view, the product development approach is going to be very different. In the B2B case, it's going to be way more client request focused. And this means meetings, potentially a lot of meetings. In the B2C case, this is going to mean relying on quantitative data. Again, if you have a large enough customer base, and then you will be relying on the usual tools of the trade, like cohort analysis, sequence analysis, or A/B experiments. And more or less the same differences apply to getting a new feature validated. Either you just launch in an experiment, for example, A/B experiment, or you need to meet your client and do a walkthrough of the new feature and then try to get some insights there. But this can potentially also influence the tech stack or the architecture that you are going to be building, because the need is very different. On one hand, you might need to be quickly experimenting, and on the other, you might need to quickly be enabling customizations for a certain client in the B2B case. As an example or anecdote, some people I know are running a white label food delivery service for restaurants. And this requires constant customization. So every single restaurant is asking for, change this here, change this other thing there. And we're talking only maybe about templating, but this might also be impacting some of the properties or features of the product itself. In my opinion, they should have invested in building an architecture that supported this use case of white labeling and building customizations, but they didn't. And well, currently they're they're cloning a master repository and making ad hoc changes in each of those. So I guess you can imagine how painful it is to get those changes back into the master repository. It's very, very painful for them at the moment. The point I'm trying to make in this particular case is, depending on the type of the business, the tech stack or the architecture might be different. And this is also something that you should be considering, and part of the decisions that you would be making as a technology leader might be influenced by the kind of market that you're trying to tackle. Also, the people-related skills that you and your team are going to need are different. Again, because you can hide behind your website when building a B2C product, and it will work. This meaning that you can succeed in the B2C space being a jerk with a great product, but you can also succeed in the B2B space by having an average product and great people and selling skills. Let's now move to another of the dimensions that I think it's worth considering, which is, shall we work for a tech company or not, and what are the differences in between a tech company or not a company. I really do not want to open the kind of worms of what is a tech company and what is not. Let's just say that what you can find in each is going to be a little bit different. I've tried to list some of those things in here. If you really want to have the conversation about what is tech versus a non-tech company, please engage with 𝗹𝗱𝗶𝗺𝗯𝗶𝗵 on Twitter, because the conversation there can get really interesting. And also ping me if you do so, because I would like to follow. So what things can we find, for example, in a tech versus non-tech company? One is that the general understanding of some technical concepts, including the very basic ones like technical debt, in a tech company is very easy. And usually the tech team is king, and you will be usually surrounded by people who are great at coding, programming, designing systems. You will also see that there are separate tracks for individual contributors and management tracks, versus potentially in the non-tech company, at some point, the IC or individual contributor ladder being capped. And then the only way to make progress in your career is switching to management, which is the best career progression path from my point of view. And then in a tech company, you can usually wear flip-flops and shorts and no one will care. In a non-tech company, maybe you need to wear a suit, maybe not. And in tech, usually the engineering work is very well rewarded and understood. So let's say understood and then so rewarded, and it might not be the case for non-tech companies. The next dimension I think it's worth touching on is, shall we work for a startup or not? Or should we potentially join a corp? In a startup, I think one of the most important things to take into account is that every single role has very broad scope. And as an example, when I was working at 11870, I was tracking servers at night and building sorting algorithms for reviews during the day. So that's very little specialization, right? What do you need to rack servers in a data center versus coding? But this is usually what happens in a startup. Not so well defined responsibilities, and one being able to contribute to a lot of very different things. So another thing that proves the point of this broad scope, or how things are different between startup and corp, is, for example, how you hire. So how you hire in a startup is definitely you are going to rely on your network, and then you're going to bring great people you know, and then you're going to establish on some referral program so that the team brings great people they know, and then you can rely on job postings or agencies from a point of view with a low rate of success. But it is also true that I have not tried the new agencies that are out there, in particular in the Spanish market, like Circular or Manfred, but I've heard great things. Something I've also used in the past is building relationships with some teachers at universities and teachers that are able to spot talent or potential in some of their students. And definitely the Tuenti challenge is something that we built back in the days at Tuenti in order to try to get as many great people as possible. Some of the things that you can expect in a startup is change. So a startup by nature either grows or dies. I think if a startup is just stable, that's not really considered success. So a skill that you will need to develop or that you need to bring is that you should be adapting to change and adapting to change really fast. Working hours in a startup, it depends on the startup, it depends on the person, etc. But I, for example, remember at 11870 or at 20, the routine for a majority, again, for a majority, not everyone, of people was work, 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 party, party, party. And kind of the mantra was work hard, party harder. And also an anecdote from the days at 20, when the CEO would see someone leaving the office at 6 p.m., he would then ask them, were you hired part-time? And depending on if the person was a new hire, this would be scaring them a little bit, but in fact, it was a well-intended joke. So in comparison, what is like working in a corp? So definitely there is a lot of specialization, and the amount of specialization depends on the size of the company. But I wanted to touch, for example, on how currently or how hiring works in a tech corp these days, which is basically just clicking 3 buttons, and then in 1 month, a great individual will be joining. So this is compare this to, organizing the Tuenti challenge or getting in touch with teachers at universities. That was my previous approach when working for startups. So 3 clicks away, and there is a great team of sourcers, recruiters, and interviewers that are just going to make hiring possible really, really quick. From a point of view, it's also easier to have a more balanced work life. And something that is not a required skill at a startup, it will be useful, but not required. But it will be a requirement for being successful in corp, is being able to influence without authority. And that's a really nice skill to learn, and not that easy, I have to say. And also in corp, one of the big differences is that there is going to be process for everyone, for everything, rather than let's just do it. Because in a startup, there are too many things to do to make a conversation around every single decision. While in corp, just because of the specialization, etc., there is a process to follow. And examples of processes. There are processes of how to get a new laptop, how to change your desk, how to move within the office. There is a process for interviewing. There is a process for promotion. There is a process for giving an external talk. It's process after process. A process, though, describes how a system works, and how to hack the system might be a great topic for a future talk. Let me just provide an anecdote of a company I worked for, which was a corp and non-tech, so that you can get to see the limits of what people are able to get to. So one of the values that we had in that company was that we cared about people. And one of the things that we paid attention to was ergonomics, so that people would have the right chair, the right desk, and the right height of the desk and the chair, and so on, so that people would not get injured when working. So every desk would be adjusted to the right height. But the person running the office, kind of the office manager, let's say, thought, but if every desk is at a different height, the office is going to look ugly. So how do you think the problem was solved, or was tried to be solved? Because luckily we were able to stop this. So the suggestion was to place people based on their height, so that the desks next to one another would have the same height. instead of organizing people by teams, who would be organizing people by height. Yes, this is, I think, extreme example, a real example there of what a non-tech corp can get to if one is not careful. Let me touch on the team. So another dimension for me to consider. I consider a great team one where collaboration is very natural, where there are no jerks. And I'm also wary of terms like rock star, because if rock stars are just great coders who are not leveling up the rest of the team, I don't think that those are great individuals for a great team. So having no jerks, having a broad variety of skills and backgrounds, so diversity from my point of view is important. Having a mix of depth and breadth in terms of skills, knowledge is also important. Having a lot of alignment. This is not necessarily dependent on individuals, but rather having a great team culture, and definitely having trust, so that everyone can count on one another in order to deliver on our goals. Compare these to just having the average team. Again, I can touch on having rock stars, or maybe zero diversity, poor collaborators, having self over common goals, and tonto el último kind of culture. I think that those are signals of an average team. I would like to say, though, that having an average team or joining an average team with a mission of making a great team is, for me at least, is one of the great things to do professionally, and is super rewarding to do. So it is definitely easier to change the average team to become a great team, rather than changing a startup to become a corp, or the other way around, or changing a non-tech company to become a tech company. So this one is definitely feasible. Another of the factors that I think we should be considering when tackling the different opportunities or deciding what our next step should be is there a strong culture in the organization, in the company? And the reason is that the alternative to not having a strong culture might be having maybe the default Spanish culture. I am not trying to judge if Spanish is better than French or Italian, not at all. I'm just saying that there are some typical behaviors in the typical, let's say, Spanish company, if we want to index on the Spanish case, that from a point of view do not reflect or do not enable great teams to do their work. So kind of a top-down culture, long working hours. A positive thing, though, is fast decision making, and then on the non-so-positive side, again, employees are not generally respected, or the bar for what is good work is not super high. But let me touch again on this strong culture. The problem I mentioned before, if there is no strong culture, then the local culture is the prevalent one. And I remember in my days at Schibsted, this was the case. There was no strong culture. And then the company was present in a lot of countries, mainly in Europe. But that meant, for example, that we would be dealing with Scandinavian people or French people or Italian or Spanish people, depending on the day, depending on the decision to be made. And then the approach to getting some decisions made was very different depending on what team you were talking to. And The reason for that is that there was no strong company culture. From my point of view, also something to consider when we're evaluating our next steps. And then the point a little bit of the deck and this talk is, what do you want? Do you want to climb the ladder or not? Do you want to be CTO or not? And then what will you find it? And then once you have decided is, how will you succeed at it? Let me spoil you by sharing with you some of the things that do matter to me. And each individual cares about different things. So if you like what drives me, then feel free to copy and make yours. But I highly encourage you to do this exercise yourself. But let me spoil you a little bit with what matters to me. Learning is super important to me. And this is, for example, what triggered my change from leaving Tuenti as the CTO to joining another opportunity in a non-tech corp, and also changing city, relocating to Barcelona, etc. But what motivated that change was that I felt that I was stalled and that there were a lot of things to learn. So I decided to make the move. Sorry. Another thing that matters to me is having great people around me. And I think, fortunately, this has been a constant. I've been super lucky to have great people around me in 𝗹𝗱𝗶𝗺𝗍, at Tuenti, at Schibsted, and now at Google. Something that also matters to me is impact. So building some sort of shady website to scam people is not something I would like to do. So I prefer, trying at least to change the world for good. And money, in my case, should be an afterthought, which is very different, by the way, that I do not care about the money. So I do care about the money so that I do not have to care about the money, which is a little bit different. This said, this is about me. Let me give you a few tips that might be useful for you. Again, feel free to discard. There's a lot of opinions, Luis's opinions. Feel free to take the ones that you like. One is reflect, know yourself, invest time in there. What do you really want? And take into account that what we might want today is not what we might want 5 years from now, and it's totally fine. And in this introspection exercise is also valuable to get to know what your current skill set is and what are your gaps, and are you willing to fill those gaps? And I think it's also reasonable to say, these are my gaps and I don't want to invest in closing them. That's also fine. But as part of the exercise, I think it's super useful. And whatever you do, you join a startup, you join a non-tech, you join a tech, you join a corp, build a network. The network is super important for your career moving forward, independent of the step that you will be taking. In the corp setup, though, build a network in the corporation, because that is going to be super useful in order to get things done. But otherwise, also build a network within the communities, tech communities, and professionals like you, because this will only be enabling opportunities in the future. And maybe the last point is take the risk. I think we are in an industry at the moment, and at a certain point where the cost of doing something wrong, of making a bad choice, is zero, because there is just no bad option. So I encourage you to just take the risk and explore, because every option is going to have quite a bunch of positive sides to it. And this is due to working in tech at the current time, where there is a lot of demand for our talent. And This is all. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this conversation very early on a Saturday morning. We're going to be starting the round of questions. Before doing that, I just want to say thank you again, everyone. If you want to follow up, if you want to reach out, if you have some feedback about the presentation, feel free to contact me either through Twitter or by email. Thank you.
Okay, Luis, I need you to stop sharing the screen so they can see my face. There we go. Whoa, we're back. That was fast, but I was keeping track. So it was like, how far is he? How far is he? So first of all, thank you very much for your talk. I can assure our listeners, and I swear to God this is true, that when Luis speaks Spanish, he's a little bit more energetic. I'm just going to throw that in there. No, but it was actually very interesting. And I believe we have a couple of questions here. Let me rewind and find it. There we go. So there was one that said, what's your take on going from managing the big picture, like you were doing before, to being a Google engineer of such a small part of the bigger product, which I guess not much capacity to impact the broader product, in this case, Google Maps. So how do you transition? How do you deal with that kind of transition, which is a big difference?
I think that is a great question. And the way I think about this is, do I want to invest in breadth versus depth? And currently in my position, I am investing in depth. And there are a lot of things that I am, let's say, delegating to other specialized people. So I'm not involved in recruiting. When I need someone, I do 3 clicks and then there we go. But it is true. And but I think there is value in also going deep, as I believe there is value in exploring horizontally the breadth of the problems. In terms of impact, though, what I'm currently doing, I am enabling the rest of the feature teams at Google Maps to make better decisions based on understanding their users. So I think I am influencing Google Maps very much, indirectly, but pretty much.
Yeah, no, I guess you can. I mean, I think the key word here is indirectly, right? You don't have that voice where you can say, stop. This is bullshit.
Yeah.
Let's do it this other way. Okay.
Yeah, that was the 20 times though, where we should not do this and we will not do it, and then decision made. Next.
Exactly. Yeah, because in the end, I'm guessing, and we've all been there, right? There are many supporting arguments for and against some kind of decisions, and it really ends up. I mean, in some cases, it's about let's say the way things work, but in many others, it's just your personal take on this, right? And so someone has to make the decision. There is no real advantage of doing this way or doing that way. Anyhow, we have another question here from Iván García, and this one is in Spanish. And he says, how would you work with a company model that mixes the B2C with a potential B2B model? Does it make any sense to have a single team, or what kind of structure do you think has the best potential to deal with this?
This is a complex question, and I do not have a great answer to it. I would definitely, my first take at it, though, would be to, yes, separate the B2B from the B2B teams, at least the parts that need to be closer to the clients, because that is the part that is more different. The core technology, though, might share similarities or even be the same, even though I believe that, again, the technology choices do matter for if we factor in B2B or B2C as available. But I would at least separate the client-facing parts, and this may be also impacting or mean the tech teams that are closer to the clients.
No, that's
a first shot.
No, but it's a very good distinction, right? There's a different friction between the teams working with the client and the teams working with the B2B approach. I've seen this many times, like the let's say, psychology, even in the sense of how do you design things? And by design, I mean user design, in-depth product design is very different. It requires a bit different perspective of what the clients are looking for between an enterprise and the end user, basically.
And well, that's an important point, because when we think, for example, of enterprise offerings, so B2B offerings, usually the UI is not great. But this provides a signal that maybe the decision maker is not the user.
Yeah. I will go on here and break an olive branch and just poo a little bit over Google, because Google as a company has never been good at developing B2B products. They are notoriously bad. Not bad, I wouldn't say bad because that's not fully true, but if you compare them with other providers of certain solutions that are end-to-end B2B, they do a much better job in delivering value to the B2B client than Google does. And that Google has always been an engineering company for engineers, by engineers for engineers. And that has been changing, I would say, recently, but maybe not fast enough, I would say.
Yeah. So let me add something on top of that. Again, my opinions are just mine, not my employer's. I agree with you. So there are some gaps in how Google has traditionally approached B2B, because they traditionally thought of B2C, right? And the interactions and getting the requirements and developing empathy with the customer, that was just not part of the core skill set of Google. As you say, this is changing. But I also believe that this is why Microsoft was very good at building a cloud business. They developed the technology, but they already had the skills in order to reach the enterprise, because that's what they were doing for a long, long time. And they went crazy. I mean,
well, I think the best example here is Teams, how they've literally obliterated Slack. Not because they're better. I'm not going to even go into is it better, is it worse, but the fact that they already had the procedure to push it through their enterprise clients and basically take over. I was looking at their active users recently. They had, like, during the pandemic, they reached 75 million active users for Teams already. So that was pretty intense. And I would even add what you just said is, even if the people in charge are changing, I think Google and other companies that have originally been very B2C, they already have these procedures inside. So even if you have the right people, you have to struggle with the internal procedures on how to do things, which don't fully align with what you would need to go fast or be powerful on the B2B side, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And in terms of adjusting direction, etc., of course, a startup can adjust direction way faster than a big corp. And I usually use the analogy, if you're into sailing, light sailing, you can just change the direction in seconds. And compare this to a cargo ship. A cargo ship takes hours to change direction. But when the goal is to go from A to B, the cargo in one trip delivers an incredible amount of throughput, while the light sailing ship would need several or thousands of trips, right?
Yeah, so we have several other questions. I'm going to conflate two of them because I think they're kind of connected. One is, how do you recommend building a CTO career? What's the formal training, network coaching, learn by trying, all together? And I'm going to connect it with what Felipe from Flywire is asking also, which is, what's being your strategy to keep yourself updated on the tech side after being many years in the management track? So I think both are two sides of the same coin. Like, how do you develop your career, and how do you balance that once you've developed one branch versus the other one? Because Felipe was asking, do you work with a pendulum strategy where you intercalate, like you interchange management with going back to IT jobs and back, or how do you do that? So first one is, how do you get there? And I think the second one is, how do you keep it? How do you balance it?
Great questions. On how to get to a CTO, I would definitely encourage developing the technical skills as a requirement. So everything is going to be a set of requirements in here. One is deliver on your tech skills. Try to get exposed to as many different technologies as possible so that you are able to incorporate learnings from one domain to another. This is, from a point of view, quite important. So do not over-index, for example, on becoming a Golang expert and only that. Get exposed to the end-to-end problem and work across the stack. This is a requirement. Requirement number 2, get decent, at least at project management. Requirement number 3, get incredibly good at people. Develop empathy. I mean, there are lots of materials in there. By the way, I think in Spain, 𝗹𝗱𝗶𝗺𝗶𝗵 has done a great job socializing what it's like to be a manager and deal with professionalizing a little bit how we think about managing, at least in Spain. So get good or excellent at people. And then once you deliver on those 3 requirements, it's a matter of finding the opportunity or the opportunity finding you. And I think it's pretty natural as long as you enjoy the path.
Yeah.
The second question from Felipe. Hola, Felipe, by the way, long time no see. No, I do not have a strategy. Maybe my strategy is I want to fill in the gaps and I want to make the most of my career. So, and for me, this is just, filling holes, filling gaps as I move forward. So the current position I hold in Google kind of doesn't let me move horizontally as much as I would like, but it enables me to really go deep into some aspects. And I don't know what the next opportunity is going to be looking like, but I will be looking for filling another gap.
So we're actually running out of time. There's still a bunch of other questions, and I advise everyone to reach out to you. Luis is always very, very helpful with any other questions. So I know we're leaving some on in there, but he will gladly answer, I'm pretty sure. I'm going to close down this with a question, a personal question. Well, it's a dual question again. The first one is maybe a little bit complicated, which is you've been scaling up in your managerial role. This is what my dad used to say. He said, the higher you climb, the stronger the winds are, right? And so I wonder, now you're working at Google, and not specifically about Google, but in general, we're seeing a big animosity against tech companies, and specifically between US companies and Chinese companies. There's a lot of talk about, censorship on one side, about cyber security and cyber risks around technology companies, including also the whole meddling in politics. Have you started experiencing, let's say, pressure around or having to decide from an ethical and moral perspective certain things in your higher roles, right? Because CTOs tend to stay on the technical architectural level, but as you keep going higher and with the, let's say, with the risk that we are getting exposed to right now, have you been yourself in a position where you had to make ethical or moral decisions that obviously trail down to the technical side?
I would say not really, but I think it depends. So, for example, these days, the data that everyone is collecting, and when I say everyone, is because everyone at the moment is trying to collect as much data as possible. And well, one of the talks during the week was also about the Diogenes syndrome.
Yeah.
with data, which I really agree with. I mean, if there is no use for the data, we should delete that data. So without a clear use case, we should delete it. And the reason is that we don't know in the future how that data can be used against the people we care about, or users or customers. So I think maybe the industry as a whole is not yet there, but definitely some players are already heading in that direction. So let's only collect what we need in order for the product to work as we expect, and the rest should be deleted forever. As one example of a trend, ethical trend that is really impacting from a point of view how we do tech.
No, I think it's interesting to hear you say this because, again, I think a lot of people just focus on the CTO side as a technical position, but we're getting to the point where you're also making calls on the ethical sides of the technical infrastructure, right? Anyhow, Luis, we do need to move on, and it's been an absolute pleasure having you here as always. It's good to see you. I don't know what your future is going to look like, but by the look of your beard, you're either going to become a preacher or you're going to become a hermit or something like that. And I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to see what your future is going to look like. You know, we will always be by your side, whatever you decide. So, Luis, thank you so much. Enjoy the sunshine, enjoy Spain, and stay healthy. Thank you very much, man.
Thank you, Alex. It's been a pleasure.